Hello there. I definitely would love to introduce our guest speaker tonight, William Wilson. He is the Cultural Arts Manager at the Grand Theater Center for the Arts in Tracy. Many of you know him very well. He's very generous, very kind, and very open to share his knowledge and his expertise with many of us who asked him for advice and asked him for questions. Um, William holds a BFA degree from Youngstown State University. He's also known to be a wealth of knowledge and in all kind of aspects of the arts, actually, um, specifically in the arts and arts organization field. He's here today to talk to us about his experience in running an art center and working successfully with artists, city staff, nonprofit organizations, and leading the Grand Theater and working with them to be such a winning organization. It is an organization that we all look up to, and thanks to all of your work, William, and all of your service. Without really any further delay, I am so honored to introduce our friend William F. Wilson.
Thank you, Sawson, for the kind introduction. I truly appreciate it. And thank you for having me this evening. Your cross-community collaboration that you're executing in this platform is completely impressive. So I'm going to start tonight where I started in preparation for this meeting. We had a meeting back on May 28th with these gracious leaders and their support staff. And, I shared a little perspective in preparation for the meeting, and I think it's a co-experience that we've all had. We've had too many webinars and online meetings and events, but this experience has come with perspective, right? In my case, it's confirmed the fact that I absolutely despise most online exhibitions. That's not going to change because of the pandemic. In fact, maybe it's made it worse for me. And the platforms that we use to have these meetings, I use several simultaneously, WebEx and of course Zoom and Microsoft Teams. The best things that happen in those platforms is when a speaker is able to share information in a succinct way and facilitate a question and answer session. So that's really the goal tonight. We're going to have some dialogue, and typically most of this information that I'm going to mention tonight is facilitated through a 60 to 90 minute facility tour at the Grant. We're going to try to have a meaningful exchange in 20 to 30 minutes. So I've been thinking a lot that this is, if you're a fan of Top Chef, this is much like a quick fire challenge for me. And I have lots of notes on my monitor that I'll be referring to because I really don't want to forget the chronology of how these ideas and history connect together. So if any of you work in the public realm, you know that it is not for the meek. If any of you work in the nonprofit or private sector and collaborate with the public realm, you know that that can be often difficult. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background as it relates to why we're here tonight. I am born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio, which makes me a product of the Rust Belt. I'm very much a working class family. As I became a teenager, I became a punk rock kid, and I largely grew up between Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cleveland, Ohio, and was certainly influenced and inspired by the experiences I was having between New York and Chicago. I am a trained multi and interdisciplinary artist, and along the way I became an exhibition designer, a curator, a creative worker. I started working in redevelopment and creative placemaking, and also became a consultant. So that led to me relocating to Stockton in 2001 to open the storied Horton Gallery at San Joaquin Delta College in Stockton. Had an amazing 5 years there, and then transitioned to the Grand, which was coming online with the hiring of staff in 2006. So much of my creative practice is centered around the opening or reopening of facilities and programs. And it certainly was an intentional career path to do that. I became a specialist in this capacity more so as a natural progression of my interests. And I have done so by rehabbing commercial properties, historic properties, new museums, and galleries alike. So, part of my role as the now cultural arts supervisor in the cultural arts division, we reside inside of the city manager's office in the city of Tracy. We offer creative consultation in a variety of ways. So I'm networking with developers and contractors, artists, and arts organizations. I also do that privately if an interesting project or a kind invitation comes along. I think my experience has confirmed that there are a whole lot of artists in downtrodden communities and neighborhoods around the world that understood what creative placemaking was decades before it was officially coined. So, we were out there in the dirt of things and doing it by necessity and desire, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. And that was done largely without any system level support. And more often, the systems were telling us that they didn't support or value our efforts. And I think there's also a lot of misplaced confusion about this concept. So I want to start by defining and making some quick observations about what creative placemaking is. The origin of the word placemaking comes to us from the community development sector in the 1960s. And in that capacity, it was a then new concept, largely talking about housing, core infrastructure, and public safety. And this idea that those elements alone were not enough to revive neighborhoods or a city center, but rather that the overall quality of life had to be addressed. So in looking at overall quality of life, we might be talking about things like education, healthcare, parks, simple things such as walkways, mobility, access to retail and shopping. The addition of the word creative to the term happens formally in 2010-11, and this was done through an effort from the National Endowment for the Arts when they released a report where they were studying communities that were using the arts and cultural investments to change places. So the key component to remember about creative placemaking is that at its core, it fosters congregation, right? It's about social interaction. It also supports the creation of an art scene, right? It's empowering the users with meaningful resources and systemic change. So you hear a lot about systemic change these days, but it wasn't necessarily popular to bring up those ideas back then either. Additional outcomes of creative placemaking include literacy, community pride, community service, property values. Interesting, lowers truancy and crime rates. And we all have to be very conscious that effective creative placemaking must also come to terms with any cultural disruptions that may be caused by gentrification, right? There is another side of the coin. I think really good creative placemaking celebrates humanity in both large and small ways, and it stimulates dialogue while encasing memory. I like that phrase a lot. And I'll give you some very high-profile examples of creative placemaking so you can see just how real this is. Think about New Orleans post-Katrina and how the creative community there was empowered to restore neighborhoods and landmarks and amenities that help capture the history of their arts and culture that the powers that be weren't necessarily interested in restoring or putting resources to first. I'm sure you've heard about the High Line project in New York City. That's an excellent creative placemaking project. Think about the practice and work of the artist Theaster Gates, a brilliant social change artist in the city of Chicago. And then there's a new project coming online. I would encourage you all to pay attention to it. It's in the state of California. It's called Destination Crenshaw. It's down in Los Angeles. And it is about taking a stretch of Crenshaw Boulevard and empowering the Black community to have ownership and influence in how people engage within that space. So Tracy's story is really America's story, but they didn't realize it. There is a boom of arts investment that happens in the mid 90s and goes into the late 2000s across America. And Tracy's story begins in the 1990s as well. And that was a community-wide envisioning due to significant population growth. And I want to take you through these numbers quickly because they tell an amazing story on their own. In 1990, the population was 34,000. In 2000, it was 57,000. In 2010, it was 83,000. And now in 2021, we think the number is going to come in at 98,000. That growth pattern in the city of Tracy represents a 65 percentile increase. And Tracy's, of course, not alone in the region. Cities like Dublin and Manteca have also experienced this phenomena of tripling populations in a short amount of time by American standards. So we learn that the geographic advantages and preferences support commuter lifestyles, right? They also support a lower cost of living in comparison to the Bay Area and now in the Sacramento Valley. And the expansion of the logistics industries in the greater Bay Area mega region have impacted our lives in ways that we're just starting to come to terms with coming out of the pandemic. That industry actually exploded during the pandemic, and we are going to feel the repercussions of that, both good and bad, for many years to come. So in Tracy's history, there's a series of milestones. There was a very important community evaluation project where resources were evaluated in relationship to the future. And that was called Tracy Tomorrow and Beyond 2000. It assembled community leaders and citizens across business sectors and education and really created a brain trust project where these teams, which each took a topic such as public safety or education, and in our case, the arts, they acted as ambassadors into the community. They reported back their findings, and they started to design a city of haves, right? To support this growing population. What city do we want to become that can facilitate a support system for the population that we are to have? And this process began in the 90s, and I can tell you today in 2021, there are still many people that are not at ease with the path of progress. Also happening early in the story is the Cultural Arts Master Plan in 1999. And that was really an effort it sought to unify the arts and the cultural resources within a new city department. And the primary recommendation was to save the historic Grand Theater, which was a 1923 vaudeville half house that had special meaning. It's a generational experiential landmark in downtown Tracy. So remember that as we talk forward in the dialogue, because that connection point to the community would result in very few detractors of the project. And again, when you learn how it's funded, you might think the opposite. In 2001, there was a fire that was then known as the Grand Apartments. So these second floors of the old hotel buildings became very inexpensive and not well taken care of apartments. In fact, it's been fascinating for me because over the years that I worked there, I've had people who used to live in the apartments who've come back and they can't believe what we turned it into. And it's incredible to see their face change, to know that, that time of their life that was difficult living there has resulted in this incredible public amenity. Well, this fire prompted the city to act more quickly. because of course the assets then were threatened, right? So the city moved quickly from that point. It purchased these properties in 2002, and then shortly thereafter the civic art plan came online in 2003. An interesting thing about the civic art plan, it was adopted before there was much of a cultural arts division or any staff to support it. So when I arrived in 2006, I was very much the first administrator of the public art program in Tracy. Planning and construction went on for about 2 years, 2004 to 2006. ELS out of Berkeley was the planning, design, and architectural consultant, and McFadden Construction was the general contractor at the time. They were based in Stockton. They are no longer in business. And then we opened the facility in September 2007, and that timing is really important. So if you remember, we persevered through a great recession between 2007 and 2009. In many ways, we're still dealing with the lingering damage of the foreclosure crisis across Northern California and definitely in Tracy. The disparate situation that we have now with exponential housing costs on the backside of that historic event is remarkable, and one that historians will write about as we move forward. So what did we do? We designed and operate a municipal regional interdisciplinary art center. That's a mouthful, right? It's the only facility of its kind in the state of California. It was the only one in 2007, and here we are in 2021, and we're still the only one. I have a lot of mixed thoughts about that. It's a point of celebration. I'm going to define what that means for you so you can better understand it. But what does that say about California? What does that say about the difficulty for other communities to take a successful model, make it their own, build their own version of the grand in their own community? It tells us that it's not easy, and these communities are still not getting a consensus of support to make it happen 15 years later. So I said that we're municipal, regional, and interdisciplinary. That means we're city-owned and operated. We have an approximate 60-mile sphere of influence. I would loosely geographically define that as the eastern foothills to the East Bay, and from Sacramento to Merced. Of course, programming drives geography, right? So this sphere of influence is immediate. That is every day. We're operating, collaborating with people within that circle. And of course, when the programming is higher profile, we have people coming from states away. We do experience real cultural tourism in the city of Tracy. The facility is interdisciplinary in that it combines dance, drama, music, literary arts, and visual arts in a single structure and location. That's an incredibly important designation. There are lots of performing arts and visual arts centers in California and in America, but very few of them have figured out how to combine a much larger array of disciplines and services. The project is part of a larger and still ongoing downtown redevelopment project as a cornerstone infrastructure. The conversations that revolve around that lend itself to future goals, right? This idea of that part of downtown can become an arts district, that cultural tourism continues to grow and define our brand, and that it's an exponential economic driver. There hasn't been an economic study of the arts in San Joaquin County in many years, and it's an important piece of data that we need to look at going forward. The last one was done by the University of the Pacific, and it took several organizations collaborating to know what the investment of the arts is in San Joaquin County. So the project also combined historic preservation and new construction in co-joining 5 buildings. That's the Shamrock Hotel from 1906, the American Hotel from 1909, the Grand Theater from 1923, a newly built studio theater in 2006, and an old firehouse building in the days of horse and carriage fire service from 1900. And it also includes an Independent 6 building, which is on the National Historic Register, which is the first town hall and jail in the city of Tracy, also from 1900. It occupies a half city block in both directions, and depending on how you count the dollars, it's between a 19 and $21 million capital improvement project that came through the city's redevelopment agency. And of course, the redevelopment agencies are long gone in the state of California. They were deassembled by the state, causing lots of chaos. That chaos stunted arts redevelopment in California for several years, as every community had to figure out whether it was going to run its own redevelopment agency or find some other way to do these projects. It's important to note that our history is tied to the community so deeply in so many ways. Coming from that Tracy Tomorrow and Beyond project was a group of highly invested private citizens who would form a group called the Arts Leadership Alliance. And this was the first consensus building organization in the project and in the city. And they would go on and eventually become the Grand Foundation. I will mention them again. And they had a goal to raise $1 million to support the capital campaign. And they actually raised more than $1 million, but they wrote a check to the city of Tracy for $1 million. And that's a remarkable occurrence. It is very rare that private citizens can ever build enough consensus and support to willingly write checks to city government, right? It just doesn't happen much in America. So we have ongoing commitment from the community as taxpayers and the city to professionally staff and fund the center. And staffing is a big deal. That level of commitment is huge, and it means that there is a protection of the investment and there's a high level of awareness in regards to risk management. I would advise anybody who wants to get in the art center business to think about staffing and risk management every day that you're at work or working on the project. So this is really interesting. The grant ended up becoming one of 50 study participants in a national report on cultural infrastructure in the United States between 94 and 08. And that project was called Set in Stone, Building America's New Generation of Arts Facilities. It was written by Alan Brown from the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago and released in 2012. And it was an incredible project to be a part of. They found us, we didn't find them. The project investigated the organizational decisions, implementation strategies, and consensus of building museums, theaters, and art centers in America during that time frame. And it was the first, and I believe still the only, analysis of cultural building of this scale and size to be done in our country. So what did we learn? What was defined and suggested through that process? We had an independent outside confirmation that the Grand was not only a trailblazer in California, but also rare in a national perspective. Small towns and cities could indeed compete with larger cities with strong leadership and financial support. And by the way, that network that exists out there across the country, we're talking dozens, not hundreds. This concept of an art center and this design is still very rare in America, while very common in places like the UK or New Zealand or Australia, where every small town has some version of a community or art center. We have a long way to go. Our story hasn't been written yet, and we're all part of writing it. So as the population continues to ethnically and geographically diversify, there is a shift to democratize culture, and that results in the reallocation of resources. That's really great news for all of us. It was back then, and I think more so now. You know, you're having open conversations about social change and the reallocation of resources in a variety of capacities in this country right now. Some of those conversations are uncomfortable, but no one can deny the empowering results that we might gain from being willing to go through change at such a systemic level. So the investments can support equity, whereby resources and programming are not primarily utilized and designed for white mainstream audiences. That is so relevant and true in our case. San Joaquin County is one of the most diverse regions in America. Stockton, California is one of the most diverse cities in all of America. The amount of languages spoken here per capita rivals places like New York City year to year. Most of the people who live and work here don't know that, and they don't believe it when you tell them. And for that reason, our cultural diversity is the largest resource, within this geographic region. And nobody has figured out how to properly celebrate and tell that story yet. It's something that I've been working on at the Grand for many, many years. We're making inroads, but it's going to take a cross-community collaboration involving many cities and multiple counties to properly tell the story. And think about that for a moment. What business has any business sector taken that challenge on? Is any of them more capable to do it than we are? Most people look at systems like higher education or healthcare to take on that level of dialogue and strategic planning, but they haven't done it either. So this one's interesting. The digitization of content, digitization of content will continue to become more popular and higher quality. Now, this report is from 2012, remember. So think about that statement, that concept that our digital content, by necessity, will become more popular and of a higher quality, and certainly where we find ourselves today going through and emerging from the pandemic. Access is and will be determined by cost of living, right? And it's competitive in terms of the time that a patron devotes to traveling to and interacting with your venue. These decisions happen subconsciously and consciously, and you need to be a part of that dialogue. The cost of living in this region of California is not going down. What was once considered affordable, and by some regional comparisons, even cheap, I don't think many people would argue is still the case. This co-joins in the practice of self-curation. That is the what, when, and under what circumstances does someone decide to engage with the arts. And I think this also aligns with the propagation of social media, right? This idea that social media becomes a tool to have more control in what you choose to let in your life and how you let it in and for what length of time. The fifth point is that artists themselves have an increased desire to curate or control their work in settings that are seen and experienced. And I think this one is supernatural. I think this has been going on for a long time. This goes back to artists in those downtrodden communities making things happen on the ground. And I say all the time, artists make the best curators. They just don't know it either. I spend a lot of time working with artists, showing them just how true that is. And we've had many success stories in the program where artists have entered at an entry level point, and within a few years, they're curating major exhibitions within our season. So I'm very proud of that. And then lastly, that many creative development projects were or still aren't sound in their decision making. The decision making in this case references the understanding demand and mistakenly using old ideas in that decision making. So in their decision making and financial stability, sustainability models. So a better understanding of the dynamics between artists, audiences, and settings is going to continually be needed to engage future generations. And by most measures, the folks who study generational shift are telling us that is going to be increasingly harder for us to do with our two youngest generations that we serve. So that brings me to the third section of what I want to talk about tonight. And that's 21st century artists in the art world. And that phrase I say a lot. So anybody who has spent time with me, who's come to Secret Art Society at the Grand, who's engaged in internship or mentorship with me, will know that I talk about this a lot. These are the most relevant topics to all of us. And these are truths that are an amalgam of appropriation, some best learned practices, some working theories, but the whole concept is, to understand art and help others come to understand art, right? So, an interesting reference point for me personally in taking the grand on as a project and lifestyle in some cases is Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco. If you've never paid attention to Yerba Buena, they have a fascinating history, but their programming through the 90s and the 2000s was top notch. They built programming around a theme, around a narrative. And as an interdisciplinary art center themselves, their entire creative team would contribute to that narrative that created conversations and art happening there that wasn't happening anywhere else in the country. So that was sort of a spiritual guide for me in the early developmental years of the Grand. So as we move forward in the 21st century, we come to find that these findings in Set in Stone continue to ring true, right? I think a foundation for anybody that makes art, enjoys art, wants to support the arts is an understanding that art is not simply defined or really satisfied as an art or object. Art is a living declaration to define a creative process and practice. It's a multi-step process, and it takes practice to understand it and to share it with others. Interestingly, art centers do sit in the middle space of the art world, and this ranges from the obscure individual artist who's making art in their bedroom that no one knows about, to the largest institutions, international art fairs, the elite collectors and collections of the world. And sitting in this rare space in the middle of the art world allows art centers to be able to inflect and reflect influence in both directions. That's pretty remarkable. Simply put, I would say that art centers represent a large set of resources, access points, experiences that are far less common in the rest of the art world. It's also very important to consciously accept that building an art center alone is not enough. You might build it and they might not come. There's a phenomena anyway when audiences are surveyed in the arts, and that the oddity of that phenomena is that those that appreciate the arts often say that they want more of something. The most common example we see in surveys all the time is, we want more jazz. We'd like to have more jazz happening. But not only in our community, but in many others across the country, when arts institutions do make an effort to create more programming thematic in nature, it's not always received by increased audiences. So something to think about. In order to design, develop, and build, operate, and program, and most importantly, perhaps sustain such a facility, you must come to understand that the building does not merely rest on concrete and earth. What it really does is that it moves and floats upon a series of relationships. And there's a getting to know you period that you go through with an art center. And it is largely a celebratory, ongoing party for a few years, until you start to connect with your core audiences. There's the story of the project, the history of the building, the stories of the people who made it possible. And all that is incredibly important and has to be told and documented. But it doesn't last. What is ultimately sustained is a love affair with the quality of the experiences within. This is what happens when fandom and patronage collide, loyalty forms, and this is the first time that you get a look at your brand. And that brand is a reflection of your foundation that you carry forward. So, with that, you have to build consensus, right? And you have to do that while simultaneously earning the trust of your creative community. That creative community is going to be inherently distrustful of you because you're proposing a set of resources with such influence that comes from outside of them. Let that sink in for a minute. So, if you're good and you've done your job, and that happens, then you have to help them understand that this is a reciprocal relationship between the artist and the communities they live and work in. So, there is a chronology to establishing success in this business. The healthiest of art scenes incorporate resources with artists who understand their roles that they occupy. If they don't know the roles they occupy, you have to teach them. And in that process, you need to be willingly and simultaneously the student, teacher, and mentor. You have to know what hat to wear on the fly. You never know who you're talking to. Never provide an answer that you don't know to be true. Someone may be asking you a question solely to know if you know the answer. That's working in the public sector. You also have to be committed to convincing the political leadership. And unfortunately, even more committed to re-educating every wave of them that comes over time. And this is going to happen over and over again. It's going to make you frustrated and tired in the same way that making a case for the arts as a core value always is. But it's not optional, and it's far worse if you're not given a seat at the table to have a voice, right? So as much as it may pain you to have to do so, the impact is usually felt. It's usually worth it. You must remain kinetic and purposeful in order to remain relevant to your audiences. Should you lose this position, the damage is critical and you may not be able to recover. Think a bit about the 19th and 20th century models we have for cornerstone arts organizations in America. These are things like museums, symphonies, operas, big institutions that we all count on that help define our nation culturally. Many of these organizations have struggled the most with this concept. It hasn't been easy for them to remain kinetic and purposeful. That simple question of who do you serve needs to be answered all the time, because the answer to the question is going to change over time. And if you build an organization with a mission, vision, and value statement that doesn't allow for that level of adaptation, in the 21st century, that will catch up with you very quickly and you will fail. And should that happen, you will become one of a number of arts organizations that were included in the University of Chicago project that didn't make it. That report was not just about success, but about the realities of mass investing in the arts.
William, I don't want to, let me interrupt you for a second. Let's
Sure.
wrap up if we can the next couple of minutes. Then
Yeah, I'm going right into the last section here. I'm with
Super.
you.
Thank you.
So the last thing I want to say in that section is to seek a leadership level of investment. This is the ability to identify the moments where you can look back and look forward in your organizational history simultaneously. These are moments of clarity, that this is what's going to inform your relevancy. So that brings us to the now, right? Where are we now? We were on a 3-year growth pattern between 17 and 19, and then COVID happened. We shut the building down in a week that we were packed every day and night. I vividly remember we had a sold out Morris Day and the Time concert that week. That was incredible. There was so much going on, and then there was this strangeness by the time Friday came. The interim, for us has been very much probably like the interim for most out there, layered in uncertainty. We've generated countless new ideas, most of which never were approved. We've incurred more struggles. We were actually encouraging in experiencing budget cuts pre-COVID, and but we survived some more during COVID. And the silver lining is that we didn't lose any staff. You know, that's the biggest battle that had to be won over the past year and a half. That you know, cognitive celebration that people matter the most. The building can't sustain, the experiences can't happen without the people who support it. So we're going to reopen for in-person programming on July 6th and subsequently celebrating our 15th anniversary season in 2022 that will open in late September. So absolutely, at this point, I'd be grateful to hear from anybody with comments or questions.
Thanks so much, William. That was, wow, that was profound and deep and so complex. And
I warned you.
In preparation for our art center, certainly a lot of food for thought. I think Sarsen's going to start us off with the questions, and then I'm going to read some of them that have come up in the chat. So, Sarsen, you want to go?
Yes, thank you, William. That was wonderful. As usual, you're full of information and very generous with all of your knowledge. I guess my question would be, given the fact that the anticipated building would not be done in the time that it was expected, so there's a delay to 2.5 years for it. And what do you feel is crucial to do as a nonprofit organization for the arts for us to do to prep or prepare our community and artists for the upcoming center?
Sure. You know, you have to build layers of consensus, right? You know, the marketing experts will talk to you about a pool of water. They will say that your closest supporters are in your inner ring. You know, the pebble hits the water, the concentric rings expand. Your closest supporters are closest to you in the middle. That's the easy part. You have to get to the very edges of that pool of water. You have to find people who are influential in your community and outside of your community that will publicly voice the support. You know, people do that in a variety of ways. Some people will write a letter to the editor or go to a council meeting. Other people will write a check. Other people will throw a party for you. You know, there's all these things happen behind the scenes, and there's a whole lot of people in creative communities that have no practical experience and are very uncomfortable operating in a public realm in that way. But this is the true hard work that has to be done in preparation to open the facility. There's also realization that many of those folks may not come on the journey with you once the doors open. You know, society moves fast. People come and go. This is ultimately true in the lifestyles of the West Coast. People define themselves by jobs and multiple projects and where they live and work and travel. And there's never any simple answers, right? So be aware of that. Tell the stories of the people who support you. They may not understand your project, but they may find connection through the person who does. And I would also say, be very quick to identify who are not your supporters, who are your detractors. What's their story? What are they really upset about? And work to win them over. Because the voice of somebody who didn't support you, who now does, well, people pay attention to them.
Thank you.
Oh, that's a very good point. And yes, we've seen both sides of that coin already. so that'll be yeah. Those are going to be challenges. What I'm also intrigued about, you mentioned the secret society, and I was hoping you'd tell us a little bit more about what that
Sure.
does and how you use it.
Yeah, you know, I coined it Secret Art Society After Hours because we typically have done it on a Wednesday or Thursday evening after the gallery closes. So it's an after hours event. But the concept was to consolidate critical mass. I don't have the time I wish I had in my role at the Grand to address all of the needs of artists and the creative community. If I did, if that were possible, I would have, a dozen interns, and I would be in meetings with artists and arts organizations every day, all week long. So Secret Art Society addressed need, right? Like how to create a platform where I could bring people together from, whether they're artists or from arts organizations or they're arts patrons, or a parent that has a child who's interested in the arts but doesn't know where to take them to connect with other people. And that need was combined with a historic need in America, and that we don't train artists well. You can go to school and get bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and you can never learn what art is or how to talk about art or how to talk about yourself as an artist. You may or may not learn some business skills along the way. You probably won't have a practical understanding of the art world. And very quickly, these issues compound and they become secrets, right? And they shouldn't be secrets. So Secret Art Society is a play on that concept, that we are making the unknown known and helping disseminate this information that everybody should know. So I do think Secret Art Society will come back in the, maybe sometime this fall. And I think it's going to come back in a new form. I've been thinking a lot about what purpose Secret Art Society can serve going forward, what new capacity it needs to have. I should also say that Secret Art Society is not mass marketed. It is modestly communicated amongst artists and people who are interested in what we do. I'm not sending out mass promotions for Secret Art Society. And in return, it's a very low-key participation. It changes from month to month. Some months it may have 5 people, and other months it may have 30. It really just depends on the topic and what people want to contribute. I'm not interested in being a talking head at Secret Art Society. There may be topics that I want to suggest or things that I think people need to know about that are timely, but often I will ask other artists to talk about a project or their work. And we talk a whole lot about what it means to be an artist and the business of art and the challenges, right? There wouldn't be any relevancy if we weren't addressing the common challenges that we have. And then we do things like show and tell. Show and tell is an incredibly powerful tool. Artists want feedback. They don't always want a critique, right? Sometimes people offer critiques, and that's a little uncomfortable, and I have to get better at defining who wants what as we go. But as a feedback mechanism, it's very powerful. So sometimes an artist will talk about a work in project or larger project that they've completed, or sometimes they might just talk about an idea they have or a new material that they're experimenting with. It's incredibly insightful.
So just a comment from Leah in the chat that you were truly inspiring. The history that you shared was inspiring, and your role and support. I mean, it's phenomenal what you've managed to achieve. And we're really appreciative of your time and sharing your insights with us, especially at such a critical juncture for us in our journey and in our development towards also creating a sustainable art center for Dublin. Beth has just asked a question in the chat, and I think we'll end with that one. And she wants to know, is the Grand a financially self-sustaining entity, or is it subsidized by the city of Tracy?
Good question. One that inevitably comes up. Art centers in America, along with museums and performing arts venues, none of them are financially sustainable by their own means. What I mean by that is that they rely on a combination of support levels to make the revenue and expenses work. One thing that's incredibly important and rare in our case is that the city and the community made the commitment to maintain that financial support. That, much like the money that a community would put towards its parks, its recreation programs, its safety services, its utilities. There is an understanding that the arts are not extra. Doesn't mean we don't have to remind people and fight for it from time to time. But there is an innate understanding that came through the development of the project that Tracy is different, that it doesn't see the arts as optional, that this is something that we must have in our community and we're willing to pay for it. And that means that, the lion's share, 90% plus of our operating dollars come through the general fund. It is taxpayer dollars, and we justify every dollar every year, every day of the year. You have to be willing to do that. Now, why does that work? Well, it works because we also have a dedicated fundraising partner, the Grand Foundation, and they're a political partner and a fundraising partner. They can do things that we can't. They're contributing 20 to 30,000 annually in program and operations technical support. We also host events to help them fundraise. There is also income that comes through the program through sponsorships, programming level sponsorships and underwriting. That may be technical support in the form of a donation or maybe dollars from a business or a community organization. But what is critical in our model is that we can generate revenue from a variety of sources. So there's a presenting program, there's a rental program, there's an exhibitions program, there's an arts education program, there's a volunteer program. Every one of those represent access points, right? And it's the combination of revenue that you draw. Year to year, season to season, you may experience fluctuations in programming. One programming may see significant growth of revenue while another one struggles for some reason or another. So having a tiered financial model is not optional. It is incredibly hard to survive the ups and downs of the economy as well as political support without a diversification in your finances. Now, one of the things I'm most proud of about the Grand in relationship to other art centers in America, those facilities nationwide typically have a 15 to 25% cost recovery. So, that's earned gross revenue receipts, right? They're recuperating about 15 to 25% of their total operational budget. Here we are in 2021, and we're in the 40th percentile of cost recovery. That's remarkable given what we've went through. And in fact, historically,
Wow.
we've never dipped lower than 29%. Even when our budget was cut to $700,000 and half the staff was laid off, we never dipped below a 29% cost recovery. The city gives us money. We never spend all the money. You remain thrifty, you justify your expenses, and that results in something that's real. It's tangible for your patrons. They leave the facility knowing that you spent the money well.
Wow, that's awesome and truly remarkable. Yeah, so I had another question regarding how you envisage leveraging the diversity of your community. Because, this is what has worked for you so far, what hasn't?
Yeah.
Do you have any particular insights that you want to use going forward?
Sure. Yeah. That diversity challenge is, it's like a golden question, right? The person who can fully formulate the proper strategic response to that will be a superstar in America.
Yeah.
That tells you how hard it is to really get your head around and to put in motion. But the thing that I've learned through experience is that progress happens and it's not led by government. It is the private citizen and the private business sector in conjunction with other business sectors, education, healthcare, transportation, etc., who really drive the development of the city. The city evaluates their ideas, right? It has rules and guidelines and fees and reviews. And sometimes they can be an incredible partner to these projects. Very progressive cities like Seattle, they actually employ artists to serve in these different city divisions to review plans and to make recommendations for their planning. We're hopeful that this will disseminate across America. More cities will realize that creative problem solving and critical thinking can happen outside of the employee base in any given department. I often will tell a city planner, you're going to build a sidewalk anyway. You're going to put in a street lamp. You're going to have a bench or a bike rack. It doesn't have to look the same. It can be aesthetically pleasing. It can be a designed object. It doesn't necessarily have to be fine art. But we need to move that conversation, right? And those are the conversations you have to be willing to have to move the conversation. And, I would be lying to tell you that it's not slow. Government is not a leader. Government is reactionary, right? It's our job to be the leaders and then take them with us on the journey, right? Build the trust with them from the inside out.
Yeah, I think leadership is quite critical.
So
and you mentioned also having to manage.
I lost my train of thought for a moment, but it came back. So the diversity thing, here's the indicator that you need to pay attention to. Your community is going to change because you have population growth. There is a natural process that goes on inside of people wanting to come to your community to raise families, to live and work. And that key indicator happens when the parents no longer have to be there to take care of the kid. That the kid can self-sustain, right? The child is able to get to and from school or to be with other siblings or caregivers or family members, whatever the case is. And then the parent all of a sudden has this free time. And that time is typically quickly absorbed by civic interaction. We see a shift where people start paying attention to what's going on at city council. New voices, new names, new faces. More people start interacting with the media. More people are going to school board meetings and coming to public events who just moved to the community or just found this new position in life. And inside of that is where you're going to find the voices of diversity. Because every one of those families and every one of those people that decide to step up and want to interact with the public realm, they have a story to tell. I am blown away daily by the people who come in the galleries and tell me who they are and where they're from and what they've done. There is superstardom and amazing people all around us all the time. And it's because we live amongst people from all over the world who come into a space like an art center where there is a level of trust, where there's an inherent, by design, space for difficult or strange or uncommon conversations to happen. The brain trust of diversity is shared. So I think the story has to be told in a celebratory way. Otherwise, we remain in our silos. Every community level organization, every ethnic group, every community project exists out of the public realm. And the tool to break down those walls is communication. Large system level communication tools that allow all of the users equity and access. Yeah. And by example, just so I'm not giving you a repetition of those words, think about things like Sacramento 365, the original Artsopolis project that came out of Silicon Valley. These were tools, electronic tools, that changed that dynamic and brought the diversity to the surface.
Yeah, I love that. And on the point of communication, there's just another question in the chat from Beth. It says, how do you communicate with and keep involved the various arts organizations in town, one-on-one, or is there an arts council?
So San Joaquin County is an anomaly in the state of California. We have no county level arts organization. It did exist at certain times in the history here, but we haven't had one for a very long time. And it really puts us at a disadvantage with Sacramento. The state agencies pay less attention to us in San Joaquin County because we don't have that level of leadership. It's something I'm constantly complaining and bringing attention to amongst contacts I have in Sacramento, trying to shift that dynamic. The immediate local arts organizations, I always say the door is open every day. It's up to you if you want to walk through it. The lab is open. Do you want to use the equipment and the supplies or not? And it's just a very true analogy. So we try to make our local arts organizations essentially resident companies. Our drama community is small and fractured, but our visual arts community has been historically strong. So organizations like the Tracy Art League and the Tracy Camera Club, they teach in our program, they exhibit in our galleries, they have their monthly meetings in our facility. They support the programming in that reciprocal relationship that I was talking about earlier. That is what an art center does.